Hello and welcome to my small little library. Today's video is gonna be my H.G. Wells review, and I've finished reading the book box I've bought from him, and also I have my old War of the Worlds edition here because why not, right? But yeah, I finished all the books now. Actually, they all read quite fast, you know, so I thought I'd sit down, tell you what I thought about them, my kind of like rating, which ones I thought were really good, which ones I didn't like so much, and yeah, just like give you a little bit of like an entrance into H.G. Wells and his writing. First of all of the books that were in here. We have The War of the Worlds, which I think is probably his most known novel. Then we have his first ever published novel, which is The Time Machine, and then there are a few short stories in this edition. Then we have his second novel, The Island of Dr Morrow. Then we have The Invisible Man, which is also, I think, quite the popular story, and The First Man in the Moon. Those are all the books that were in the collection I bought. In all honesty, I think it's a good collection topic-wise, so you have quite a bit of different topics and themes for the books, so that I thought was quite well done. Let's start with the one I thought was the worst one, but all of these, I have to say, all of these are 3 stars and up. So I actually like his writing style, and let's start with this. I do enjoy science fiction novels that are set in like the 1900s. So technically they aren't science fiction for us because they don't play in our future, but they are science fiction novels, you know, they just don't depict a time after our time. But yeah, a lot of these are set in that kind of a setting, which I really enjoyed. I have to say, that is a setting I really like. For me it shines the most in War of the Worlds, but yeah, we're coming to that. And The Invisible Man was the one I liked the least of all of these. Simply because the main character is kind of an asshole. I personally didn't know that. I mean, I know that in most of the fiction we have, like in the films about the book and the adaptations you have that aren't like true to the book but adapted for it, he's also always like not a good character, but I didn't think he would be that dislikable. But yeah, and I know it's for a reason and he's supposed to be disliked, but I personally enjoy books less if I dislike the main character. It's just something for me, yeah. For the story itself, you have like pretty much a scientist, and he experimented with stuff and he wanted to make stuff invisible, and so he made himself invisible a little bit by accident. Like, he did want to do it, but not at the time that he did it. And yeah, because he wasn't a good man, he had to flee the house that he made the stuff in, and yeah, then he kind of tried to live, and because in his opinion he couldn't live an honest life anymore because nobody could see him, he started like robbing places and just not being a good person, you know? And yeah, so yeah, this, as I said, the story works in my opinion, but I just think it's like a weird principle to just equate being invisible to just automatically going into crime. For me it was just like a weird thing that as soon as he's invisible he just automatically goes into crime, and he never really tries to do it the right way. So that I found really weird, and that is the main reason why I gave it 3 stars. Other than that, I think the progression of the story is quite nice, because you can see how he's getting more erratic with time going on, just because a lot of people just don't take him seriously, because they can only hear his voice. And he starts to overreact about anything, and yeah, that makes it even worse for him, and obviously the crimes get bigger and bigger. And yeah, is it worth a read? In my opinion, if you want to read H.G. Wells, this one I think is not necessarily worth a read. They're better out there, they're better in this collection, but yeah, it's still kind of a classic story, you know, so maybe read it, but don't like have the best hopes for it being like your next favorite book. Then we have the second one, and this one, the problem is me. You know, the TikToks sound like it's me. I'm the problem, it's me. Yeah, that's with this book. It's The Island of Dr. Morrow. You have the main character who gets stranded at sea, and he gets picked up by a guy named Montgomery, who gets brought to the island of Dr. Morrow by like this captain, and the captain hates him because he brings quite a bit of animals on the boat, and so he throws our guy out with Montgomery onto the island and just isn't taking him back to the mainland, so he's kind of stranded on the island. And then he sees kind of like weird guys walking around the island that seem to be human, but they have a lot of animal features, and they don't really talk, and yeah, it's all really like a little bit creepy, to be honest. And yeah, in the end he like finds out that this Dr. Morrow had to go to the island because of his experiment, because the normal society just didn't want to have him anymore, which fair enough. He experiments on animals to make them more human, but he kind of fails at it, and so the book is quite bloody in the end and like quite gory, and you have like a lot of body horror in the book, even though I wouldn't say it's a horror book, I would say it's a sci-fi book. But yeah, and now why did I give it 3 stars, even though the topic is really, really interesting, and I do also think that the way he did the story does work quite well. For me, the biggest problem is the animal cruelty in the book. I can't really cope with that, to be honest. I love animals, all kinds of animals, and I had a really hard time with the depicted cruelty. And I know that it's the topic of the book, and even though I find the topic interesting, just like a trigger warning, but he does describe the animals being operated on without them being put under, so they can feel everything and they scream, and it was too much for me, in all honesty. I think those descriptions, they do further the story, so I understand why he put them there, but I didn't want to read them, in all honesty. And that is the reason why this book only got 3 stars from me, because otherwise I think it's a really, really great story, and it's a really interesting story, and also the fact that like it's never quite working because the animals always turn back into animals, because he doesn't really introduce anything human into them. And yeah, so it's a book that left me really like kind of like weirded out, and so I can't give it more than 3 stars. But this one I would actually recommend if you know you can handle the cruelty. I think it's really interesting, so maybe pick it up if you know you can handle it. Then we have the next one, which is The First Man in the Moon. This one I also found to be immensely interesting. You have our main character who tries to write a play, and he gets kind of distracted by like a scientist who always walks past the home in Italy where he tries to write his play. And he comes into like, he starts talking to him, and yeah, he tells him about his plans to make this new metal that can pretty much like make everything inside it kind of like not have weight. So it's anti-gravity metal. So yeah, he pretty much invents space flight as a way earlier date and like a really different method than we did have. So that's quite interesting, and actually because of the circumstances and our novel writer kind of sees himself as a businessman, he starts to get in on the business of making this metal, and then he also goes to the moon with the scientists together, and there they meet the man in the moon. Yeah, there's actually aliens on the moon, and they meet them, and the first meeting isn't quite the best meeting, and yeah, stuff happens after that. In the end, only one comes back, and the other one kind of like sends some messages and explains a little bit more what he did on the moon, because yeah, he can never be brought back because the metal that they used for the first spacecraft vanishes because he lands back on the sea, and somebody uses like crods in there, a child crods in there, and puts on the levers and stuff and flies off with it and kind of dies, which is like a weird aspect of the book. But yeah, they can't rescue him because they don't know how the metal is made, because the scientist stayed on the moon. And this one was really, really interesting. I didn't like both of the characters. I thought both of them kind of acted weird. The businessman has like a really short temper, and he tends to over-dramatize things. Is that the right word? I hope. Yeah, and the other one is kind of like never really... He has the right opinions and the right ideas, but he never speaks over the businessman, which he totally could, but he just never does, and then he just accepts it, which is kind of a weird thing. So yeah, this is the reason why I give it 3.5 stars. A little bit better than the other ones. The theme really, really interesting. I would say read it, because especially if you like sci-fi books with aliens in it. I for one prefer sci-fi with aliens to sci-fi without aliens. And I thought it's a really, really interesting take on the moon, the whole story. Like, the descriptions were really nice. The end is a little bit boring because there are kind of like all these logs from the scientist who stays on the moon. Instead of writing them in like the story into it, it's kind of like, oh, and then we got logs from him. It said that and that and that, and it's that and that and that. And for me, that didn't really work at the end, but it's fine. I can live with it. I think it's a nice story, and definitely a good starting point for HUS, because you can see it grows to War of the Worlds, which in my opinion is a better alien story from him, but you know. And then we come to the Time Machine and other stories. The Time Machine story, I have to talk separately about it, and the short stories, but yeah, it's a classic time machine story. It might be one of the first. In my opinion, the future... I have kind of like a similar opinion, but not like his directly. For him, he goes into the future, our main character, and he kind of like meets this humanoid creatures who are really dumb and live really simple lives, and you have like the overworlders who kind of like don't have to do anything other than like get food, and then you have the underworlders who kind of like make the clothes and stuff and have the machinery, and they start to hunt and eat, or they not starting, but like they kind of hunt and eat the overworlders. And I just think at some points he just really tended to generalize things, and the main character kind of goes and molds, he takes his own ideas and says like, yeah, it is like that and that in the future because I think so, not like because he observed it in like the world. He just has a lot of ideas and not a lot of them actually are true, and so it's really, yeah, it's a weird story to read in all honesty. For me, this book shines a lot more in the short stories. My absolute favorite short story from this one is called The Empire of the Ants, where you have like ants that grow kind of really big and kill people, which like, great story. I just love animal stories where the animals get bigger and kill people. I think it's kind of a great genre of story, you know. So yeah, that was a great story in my opinion. And yeah, the only story I disliked actively in this book is the last story, which is called The Land Ironclads, which is a war story and pretty much more into like historical fiction territory than anything else, and I just don't enjoy stories about war. It's just, yeah, could have done without this story, but I mean, there are a lot of topics, a lot of sci-fi, a little bit of like horror madness stories, and in the end I really enjoyed it. I'm a big fan of short stories, which is always a plus if you read a book like this. And because the Time Machine is only like 100 pages or 110 pages, it does make sense that they put it together with the short stories, you know. And yeah, now we come to my favorite of the bunch, which is The War of the Worlds. And I've read it the second time now, because I actually found this copy. Let's see if I can show you. This is the original copy I read, and I found it secondhand on eBay. It's a little bit of an older copy from the 90s. And yeah, now I own two copies, which I'm fine with because I really like the story. For me, it's a 4-star story. You have the main character who's kind of like, I think he's a journalist. He also writes, you know. And he sees through his window in his working room. He sees these meteorites coming down 10 days, like one a day from the moon. Not from the moon. He sees them coming down from Mars, and yeah, humanity really doesn't know what it is. And when the first one lands, they kind of figure out, oh, there's aliens in there. And at first they think, yeah, they might be dead because like they fell from Mars to the Earth, and kind of surviving that is kind of unthinkable for humans. But then it turns out they're not dead, and they're kind of aggressive, and they start to kill humans. And the book is just his story, and also a part is his brother's story, which I think was quite a good it's a good way to tell the story, to be honest, because both kind of get two really different aspects of the story, because he is like directly on the impact side, our main character, and he just gets his wife out to a cuddling and then comes back to kind of see what is going on, and he's in a lot of danger for most of the book. And then you have his brother who lives in London, and he kind of also has to flee because the aliens do get to London, but he isn't like directly where a crater is where the aliens come out of. And he meets these two women, and they try to stick together and escape on a boat in the end. And for him, the most problematic thing is when the aliens are already standing up and trying to kill the boats with the humans in it. But yeah, he never really gets too close to the aliens, which is the difference, and I think it's quite a nice thing to get to both stories of both brothers. And yeah, our main character is way too near a lot of the time, and he also meets like kind of a madman at some point in the book, and the two of them stick together, not because he wants to, but the other guy wants to. And yeah, it has a little bit of humor at times, but it's also mostly just really yeah, it's a horror story, a horror sci-fi story in my opinion, because like you have death around the corner at all times, and he also talks a lot about the dead people he sees about and stuff. So yeah, it is a war story, but an alien war story, which is probably, except for fantasy war stories, the only kind of war story I like. If you want to read an H.G. Wells book, I would say start with War of the Worlds. For me, out of the 5 books from him I've read, this is by far the best, and by far the most enjoyable. Then again, all of his books that I've read are kind of short, so actually I'm kind of glad I've got the collection. I think it's a good collection to get to know H.G. Wells. I will look further into his books because I'm kind of interested to read a little bit more from him. Because I have the feeling that maybe his older work is more my style and a lot of the other books are more his earlier work. So I will try and get more, probably secondhand, because in all honesty I'm kind of really enjoying the cover of the older book. But yeah, also this is also quite nice style, you know. But yeah, I had a really good time reading his books. I think sometimes, especially nowadays, authors tend to write really, really long books, which, don't get me wrong, if you have a lot of story to tell, do tell it. But sometimes I just need short books that I can read in between the bigger books, or like on one evening, or something like that, you know? And these H.G. Wells books are really, really great for that, and it's not that I disliked any of them like really actively, so I also didn't have like bad experience with them, which I think is also kind of nice, because a lot of authors, I have books that I really, really like, and then I have books that I don't like at all. So having an author where you're like, oh, they are all fine, like I can read them all, I don't think I really would mind reading any of those again except for The Invisible Man, so that is also a plus. Not that I plan on reading them again anytime soon, but you know, I could, and they're short, so why not, you know? Also, I'm kind of sad that we didn't do books like those back in my school days, because those would have been really, really interesting for my English courses, but sadly we read like only really boring fiction. You know. I think it's also kind of nice to have read a little bit more of like classic sci-fi. I would count H.G. Wells to be classic sci-fi. I don't know what like the official genre thingy. I don't know what officials would say to that, or what other people would think about that, but for me he kind of counts as a classic sci-fi author, because a lot of the work was sci-fi. I mean, pretty much all of them, right? Yeah. So yeah, if you want to read some classic sci-fi that is short, the collection is great. I got it on Amazon. I might just put you the link in the description. Because I think it's worth it to get that collection. Also, there's like a really, really pretty hardcover edition with like cloth bound versions. I did want to get that one, but it was so much more expensive that I settled for the paperback versions, which, yeah, it's fine, but I do enjoy a hardcover copy of a book, you know. Yeah. With that, I'm done. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and maybe leave a comment which H.G. Wells books you've read. Maybe there are some out there that I definitely should pick up as the next one. And yeah, tell me what you thought about these books if you read them. And I'm gonna see you all in the next video, and yeah, happy day, whatever day you're watching this, you know. Bye!